Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar sponsored by GAN Integrity 2026 Risk and Compliance Trends on the Horizon. It's my pleasure to be hosting our guests here today. So with me, we've got Kristy Shiers, a Group Compliance Director at Spectris. Kristy brings over 20 years of experience across legal, compliance, and governance. With us today, we also have got Matt Kelly, former editor of Compliance Week and the founder and CEO of Radical Compliance, a well-known commentator on corporate compliance, audit, governance, and risk management. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Miriam, and I'm honored to be hosting this webinar with you all today. So before we dive into the agenda, I'm just going to touch on a few housekeeping notes. So at the conclusion of this webinar, you will be receiving a recorded version of the session, which you will receive via email, along with a guide on better risk management for 2026. We will also be hosting a live Q&A at the end of the session, so please make sure to type in your questions on the GoToWebinar panel. If you do want to chat, which will be open to the audience, please make sure to use the chat functionality as well. At the conclusion of the webinar, there will be a quick pop-up survey, which we would love for you to answer. With that, let's dive into our agenda. So we're here to discuss what to expect in 2026. Our conversation will cover data management and, surprise, AI. We'll also talk about emerging risks like trade compliance and how to build for scale. Before I start the conversation, just a small note for our audience here. Unfortunately, due to a work obligation, Kristy will be spending the first half of the webinar with us, but will be dropping off at the bottom of the hour. Kristy will make the best of the 30 minutes we've got with you, and we'll start with you, diving into our first question. So, Kristy, over the last few years, compliance has really expanded beyond APAC. This means more data, more risk, perhaps more resources, not for sure, but what do you find most challenging about these developments?
Yeah, so I think, Miriam, as you said, there has been a great expanded scope in compliance over the past few years. So, you know, we started with compliance functions primarily dealing with ABC. We delve into human rights, we delve into sustainability, we delve into data protection, now AI, as you say. So, trade compliance. So I think the role of a compliance function has grown considerably. With that, I think the other challenge is the pace at which it's moving. Some things move faster than others. For example, at the moment, the world of export control and trade compliance is moving rapidly. And of course, as we'll speak more about, the world of AI is growing like we have never seen before. So, technology is not keeping up. Regulations are not keeping up with technology. So how do we deal with that? So it's the pace at which risks are evolving. And then the other thing is expanded tools that are available to compliance functions as well. So data is becoming easier and easier to come by. So that's good, except for the fact that we need to filter it. So we do need to be able to make sure that we are assessing that data as a source, as well as the data itself. So looking at ensuring that our risk assessments are very well done, so that we are having risk-based assessments and therefore a risk-based approach to our data, making sure that the quality of our data is what it should be. Just making sure that we are balancing effective due diligence with operational reality.
Makes sense, and I can only imagine that development will continue into 2026, and data, as you mentioned, growing even more, and it being very critical denominator for your processes, effective compliance, risk management. How do you look at 2026 from that perspective?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to data, we need to be smart in selecting what data we rely on and how we use it and how far we delve into it. So how much is enough, as I said earlier. So I think compliance teams are going to be differentiated not by the data that's collected, but by the systems and the discipline that they use to assess it. How do we interpret it? And then how do we use that in a practical way? How do we integrate that into daily business use? So as I said earlier, risk assessments are all important. Making sure that we are putting the right amount of time into our risk. So obviously a lower risk scenario, we're going to be spending less time on and maybe relying more on automated systems. But then our higher risk, that should free us up to spend more time dealing with our higher risk concerns. Quality of data, as I said before, making sure that we know where that data has come from. Sorry, lights. Sorry.
Yeah, we're in Europe afternoon, so it gets dark early. So.
Yeah, it'll come back on. Sorry. Making sure that our data is exactly what it needs to be. But also the use of AI. How are we using AI? I think it's a great tool and we can use it extremely effectively, but we need to make sure that we understand what we're using. We need to understand how we're using it. And we need to understand what the risks are around using that. But it can effectively, it can be an extremely effective tool.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. So great point, Kristy, you make, and Matt, maybe I can sort of use that as well as a segue to the question I've got for you around, obviously we want to dive into AI, but it sounds like data management feels like the real foundation here. How do you see the growing importance of data management in reshaping what is expected from compliance teams? I think Kristy touched on it a bit, but maybe you can expand as well.
I mean, I think that data management is going to become a crucial part of how your compliance program is effective and how you, the compliance officer personally, how you can add value, for lack of a better cliche, but how you can add value to the whole company and demonstrate to senior management that the compliance team matters. It's really going to depend on how well you can find the data that your company needs, how you can gain assurance that this is the right data. We are going to be awash in data, and the challenge is going to be to understand what is the noise out there and what is the actual valuable information. And that's going to be hard, frankly, I think, for a lot of compliance officers, because you don't study data management at compliance officer school. Most compliance officers come from a legal background, and law schools and your early career. For many compliance officers and chief compliance officers, this is not something you necessarily learned and had a good grounding in before. So you're learning this on the fly. I would even say, I had in my notes here, compliance officers need to be more data savvy. That's not the same as being more tech savvy, because honestly, the technology is really good and it's going to get really better. The tech will be able to do whatever it is you want it to do. But if you feed the wrong things into it, it's going to give you the wrong thing really fast and really well. If you don't know that you're giving it the wrong thing, you don't know that you're going to get a bad answer. I do think compliance officers are aware of the importance of good data management. But there's going to be a lot of challenges in who do we work with to get that data management capability. Is that really your job, or do you vision out what it should be and somebody else is doing it? I'll just wrap up right here on this question by saying that, what you want as a compliance officer is insight into the corporation's behavior, so you can then counsel everybody else on what the risks actually are or are not, or how well you're doing it. So ultimately, you're relying on good quality data. And if you don't have good quality data, if you don't know that you don't have good quality data, all of this is going to fall apart. You will have a foundation built on sand.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm sure our audience are thinking, yes, I absolutely agree, it resonates. But how do they approach that in practice? Obviously, theoretically, it all sounds great, but it's hard. Data sitting across many departments. You've got an agenda at the top of what we want to do. If there is no support, that could be also problematic. So how should compliance teams approach this on the ground?
Well, I could say, like, theoretically, you would divide this into maybe two phases. So first, you would need to work well with your IT team to just review what is the data we actually have. Like, is it accurate and comprehensive? Are you giving your company, or how are you developing good data hygiene practices, such as, are you deleting information or data you no longer need? If you're getting data in different formats, you have one format for contracts from the Asia division, but another format from the Latin America division, or they are in different languages. How are you going to normalize all of that data so you understand what your contracts say across both regions and you can get a global view? Is all of the data in one single repository? That is the best practice, and it is always easy to say what the best practice is on a webinar or to write it out in a whiteboard. It's really hard to implement the best practice out in the field, but if you don't have all of the data in a single repository or space, if you can't have it in a single one, maybe by law you must have data in certain places, suddenly it's duplicative. How are you going to build control over just the data you have and just figuring out where you are at this moment? And you're not going to do that without a lot of collaboration from the IT team or the chief information officer or the chief data officer, if you have one, or the head of internal audit, maybe. Phase one. Then phase two, your company is still in motion. So you're still going to need to build new processes to collect new data. You might be expanding from Asia and Latin America into Australia, and you don't have any process for collecting data from there yet. Or you're expanding into Eastern Europe. So how would you talk with senior management about what you'll need? How would you talk to the business units in those regions or in those new fields about how are we going to build a process to collect our data or to get it from our third parties? To what data are we generating internally? But you need an ability to work well with others to figure out what's the right process to capture all of the good data, so you don't have to keep repeating step one. Step two can be more forward looking. But those are two ways that you can get started on this.
Makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of, I was listening to Matt Galvin talking about his experience at AB InBev, and he said, the first thing I did was go to head of IT. And he said, head of IT had said, I'll agree not to slow you down. So it's really important to partner, especially with that team, right? And make sure that you're able to tap into all that data. Kristy, what are your thoughts sitting there listening to Matt and all of the things that you'll probably also be facing at Spectris over 2026, if not already now? So how are you thinking about all these tasks and responsibilities? What challenges do you see?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, Matt, I certainly never learned any data management at law school, so I 100% agree with that. So it's been a very steep learning curve. So if I maybe focus on a part of data, that being AI, I mean, that's where we've got the most immediate challenges, partly because, as I said earlier, it is evolving so quickly. And how do we deal with that? So I guess we always start with the law. So what do the regulations say? So that's a good start, but with AI, maybe not enough on its own. So, if we take an example, the EU AI Act, based on the risks posed by generative AI. Well, we're now moved on from that, and we now have very different risks coming up with agentic AI. Are we looking at implementing agentic AI? Are we looking at using that in the business? If so, what does that mean? And that's really a matter of looking at those risks from a principles-based platform. So again, also agree with Matt, it's about working with others. This is not something that the compliance department can just pump out a policy and say, this is how we're moving forward. One, because we don't know. We are not the experts in this. So working very closely with IT departments, working very closely with the operational departments around the business that may be using AI, or even in some cases looking at doing development themselves. So who are we working with, and what do we need to know? And then I think, as I said, we can't rely solely on regulations and what that tells. And again, very different in different parts of the world. Some parts of the world have more comprehensive guidelines than others. So how do we do that in a global organization? So what we're doing is we are focusing very much on principles. So principles such as legal and compliant use. So what do we know we can and can't do? Looking at the fact that there should be a human in the loop, and then where should that be? What should they be looking at? And is that different in each use case? What else? Robustness and reliability. Again, what is the quality of the data that's coming in? Is it reliable? Is it not? Fairness, non-discrimination, bias. A big one, obviously, is privacy and data protection. Are there those protections in any systems that we're looking at using? Transparency, accountability, governance. The list goes on. But I think my point is that where we are at the moment is ensuring that if we get those principles right, then we should be well postured for whatever comes. Now, sure, that might mean tweaks as we go on, but if we get the basics right, then that just gives us a sensible starting point, I guess, to deal with the risks and to assess the risks as they come in. So it's not only dealing with the risks, but it's also identifying the risks. And again, that's something that comes from working with groups of people. It's not just, as I said, something that comes from the compliance department.
Makes sense. And so, Kristy, it already sounds like you're already thinking very comprehensively about what does the AI governance framework at Spectris, what would that look like? How will you approach it? What are the sort of the processes, the human in the loop, as you mentioned? If we maybe reverse engineered and started with the end in mind, what does good look like for you? I don't know if you've got a deadline on when this will be rolled out, but if you want to fast forward to this already being implemented, what does good look like for you?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, good is good AI culture. So employees are instinctively pausing and thinking, what questions do I need to ask about this? As I said earlier, being able to identify the risks, and if not identify them immediately, be able to come together with the different areas of expertise and use that forum to identify risks. So I mean, good is where we have a set of guardrails, I guess is how I see it. So we want our people to be innovative, but at the same time, we want them to be innovative safely. So I think it's about putting in place a set of guardrails. And as I said, I think the principles are a good way to start with that, and ensuring that people are working around those. So ultimately, we don't want people to be scared of AI. We just need to ensure that people understand when we need to pause and consider what is the best way forward, and what do we need to put in place, if anything, to strengthen that safety net, I guess.
Makes sense. Thank you, Kristy. So Matt, maybe kind of I can ask you, as companies kind of grow more cautious about AI, and I can sense the cautiousness in Kristy's answer as well, perhaps given the regulatory and operational liability involved in this, right? Does that caution open the door for compliance to perhaps guide the business to implement more slowly or more wisely, or just take a more thoughtful approach to the whole thing here?
I mean, it certainly does. And in fact, I think I want to start by piggybacking off of what Kristy was saying around what does a good AI governance and an AI thoughtful culture look like. Well, if we wanted to look back in time at what other sort of big tech changes have we mastered before or not mastered, a good example of this would be, think about 15 years ago when companies were first encountering social media. And I would say we actually did that pretty poorly. A lot of companies would say, well, that's social media. That's what people are doing about tweeting where they're having breakfast. That's not us. We don't have to think about it. And a lot of consumer-facing companies or a lot of marketing teams learned a lot of things the hard way with how to govern social media. And ultimately, I can think of one very large fast food company where they developed a process. They were heavily franchised, very well known. I won't name them on this webinar, but ultimately they said, if you want to do something new, dear employee or franchise user, come to us first and let us review that case. And once we have defined a risk adjusted way for that idea to go, then every employee and every franchisee can do it. Something like that for AI is where we need to go. The thing about AI is that it's not just for consumer companies, it's not just for marketing, it is for everybody across all businesses and all parts of every business. But at the same time, the stakes can be really high. Probably even higher. You can do worse things careless with AI than you ever could with just being careless with social media. So I do think that this is going to be somewhat of an easier time for compliance officers to go to senior management and say, let's make sure we do this wisely. Because I think senior management this time around gets it that AI is a technology advance not to be trifled with, not to be taken recklessly. So if you go to them and say, we need to get AI right because getting it wrong or allowing it to go wrong could cause horrendous mistakes, that is not a hard argument for anybody to make to the board or the C-suite. They think about AI all the time. And in fact, I saw from a recent audit advisory group out there, they had published a survey that they surveyed board directors. And is AI good for the company? Is AI your top risk? And it was tied. Both of those things. Boards see AI as the single most important thing to get right and the single biggest fear they have for getting wrong. They exactly numerically even. So there is a great opportunity here for compliance officers to demonstrate that you know how to build effective guardrails, you know how to make good risk management culture. All of it depends on the mechanics of having the data right, but if we assume the first part of our webinar was awesome and everybody's doing it right, then when we get to this discussion about AI here, if your data management capabilities are strong, you'll have a good opportunity here, because I think data senior management is primed to have this conversation, which is not true of previous compliance issues that have come along in the past.
Makes sense. And Matt, Kristy touched on that concept of the human in the loop. And I think when we were having our prep conversations for this webinar, we were talking about, well, compliance are really poised to help the business because they are used to putting these guardrails in place. Now it's just a different risk area with AI. Could you maybe share some concrete examples of guardrails compliance can help design, and thinking about where to put that human in the loop? And is it at the beginning? Is it at the end? I know you touched on this on some of your blogs as well. Would be great for our audience.
Well, I can think of a couple of examples. So for starters, compliance could probably help to devise a risk assessment for all of your tech providers, all of whom now say in their new email solicitations that they are now AI powered. Okay, what does that mean? And how could you, you have business units out there who are thinking, I just got this proposition by email. This vendor says they're AI powered. That's going to be great. Yeah, I'll sign up with my payment card and it's $10 a month. Boom. That is a terrible way to manage your AI risks with third parties. So come up with a risk assessment that business units could use and must use to assess what this vendor means by AI, and how did that vendor's AI get trained on what data? How is the vendor testing its results to make sure that those results are valid? Another example might be to work with the legal team to define permissible outcomes for AI work product. Like, is that work product explainable, which is required under several different EU laws already? How are we testing results for algorithmic discrimination, which could lead to consumer protection lawsuits, regulatory investigations? It will look awful in the press if AI is discriminating against certain customers of yours. So, you might come up with, here is what we need to do with the work product and work with legal on figuring that out, and then work with the maybe audit or IT team to actually perform those tests to make sure that the AI is achieving all of the permissible outcomes we want to see. One last example I'll give, is, I think is my favorite, is if you're using AI in hiring, which pretty much every company is now, well, sit down with the HR team and with the business units and figure out, do we want to put humans at the beginning of the loop where AI culls your applicant pool from 1,000 to 500? And then the humans take it from there? Or do we want to put the human at the end of the loop where the AI goes from 1,000 applicants to 3 finalists, which sounds way too discomforting to me, but I don't know. I don't know what's going to be right for your company. You can put a human in anywhere in the loop, but if you put them at the beginning, you put them at the end, you're trading off control for speed, for efficiency, for cost. There's an enormous number of variables. And that's the sort of thing that compliance officers could help lead those conversations in the right directions.
Makes a lot of that sense. Thank you, Matt. Kristy, we'll probably end your part of the webinar with this last question, and wish you well on your next journey. But Kristy, moving from one risk area, AI, to a new emerging risk area, trade compliance, and I know that you've got a lot to say on this as well. This has clearly moved much higher up the agenda. How are you seeing this play out in practice for you, and what's been changing most in terms of expectations and workload on your side?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change has been trade compliance itself. So it's moved from quite a transactional aspect of business to quite a strategic one, and it's being driven by geopolitics at the moment quite significantly. We are seeing changes on a almost monthly basis, and especially in a global organization, you're dealing with that in various over various jurisdictions, some of which conflict. So you're also balancing conflict of laws type situations as well. So it is becoming more complex. So how to deal with that? And I think part of this comes back to data, when we were talking about the sheer amount of data that is available. So we do due diligence so that we know who we are dealing with, who our products are going to, what are they going to use it for, who is it going through if we're using intermediaries, all of these things that we need to find out. And then what we do is, with the due diligence, the question that's coming up is how much is enough? Because if I look in source A, B, and C and find nothing, there will always be a source D, a source E. How far do I dig? And so it really is for the operational trade compliance teams difficult for them to use that discretion as to how much is enough. I mean, guidelines are always, reasonable due diligence. Well, what is that? So it's a question we constantly have. And then, as I said, we've got very experienced trade compliance officers in our organisation, but their experience and their training is very very operational. Sorry, lights again. So that's what we're up against on almost a daily basis. So again, it comes back to your data management, as we said at the beginning.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Kristy. I think, unfortunately, we've reached the end of the first half with you. We'll continue with Matt on the webinar. We'll just say thank you to Kristy and wish you safe travels. And if you've got any questions for Kristy, please make sure to type them into the questions, and we'll make sure to get back to you via email. Kristy, thank you, and hopefully we can do this another time again.
Great, safe travels. My pleasure. Thanks so much, Miriam. Thanks, Matt. Bye. Thank you.
So Matt, let's continue with the topic of trade compliance. And obviously you're sitting across the ocean, so we want to also understand from the US perspective, and I think Kristy has hinted to this as well, the changes being obviously shaped by tariff changes, shifting trade policies, etc., under the current administration in the US. So how do you see these changes influencing compliance priorities and risk management broadly?
Well, first and foremost, they're hiring a lot more trade compliance professionals. And For any listeners out there who are wondering where if you want to skate to where the puck is going to be, to use the hockey metaphor, I keep a close eye on what companies are looking for expertise, and clearly they need a lot of help with trade compliance, which suggests that a lot of companies are not in position right now to be able to handle this. And I mean, I think that's very clearly true. We need to remember that trade compliance as a phrase, there's actually a lot that fits underneath that umbrella. Are we talking about tariffs? Yes. Are we talking about export controls to certain countries? You can't ship certain goods to them. It's that too. For a lot of businesses, this really is a first time experience. Clearly, if you make advanced missile guidance systems or the world's biggest microchips, you've had some experience with trade compliance already. But for most companies, you don't make those things. And this is still very much a learning curve. They've got a lot of immature processes, especially around third-party due diligence of middlemen who might be the customs brokers who are helping to get imported materials into the country. Who are these people? Are they reputable? How were they found? By whom within your organization? Do you want to let local business units overseas work with those sort of importers? Do you have a sourcing function, a centralized procurement? If you don't, do you want one? So right now there's a mismatch between what the risks are and what your processes are to get business done, given all of those enforcement risks. I would even say, for example, so tariffs are probably driving a lot of trade compliance worry for a lot of businesses. And right now, the Trump administration is employing tariffs in a fairly arbitrary way. They're being challenged in court. It is there's a considerable chance that our court might say, no, the administration can't do that. So do you build up strong tariff compliance right now if it goes away in next year? But even if all that happens, well, you still have export control compliance, which is part of trade compliance. That's probably not going to go away either as a matter of policy or a matter of law. So you're still stuck trying to figure out, what do I do? This ultimately could lead to bigger strategic shifts. Do we want to bring some of our outsourced functions back into the US? That's not even a compliance officer's decision. That is above your pay grade with senior management. But if they decide that, your compliance risks will change considerably. But all of it really just means that you need to keep a very close eye on what the regulations are. So regulatory change management is going to be important. And then you have to decode that into what are the sustainable processes we would want given those regulatory changes. I mean, sure, a compliance department, you could do this with a manual process and you could do it all by yourself. It'll take you forever. It'll cost a fortune. And then when it doesn't work, you won't discover that for many months. So you will need to develop some sort of way to pivot and move with what these demands are. How are we going to get this data? How are we going to verify our third parties that they're reliable? How do we know what our risks actually are? Who am I working with, me and the compliance team, to figure this out? Somewhat the legal team, somewhat the procurement team, somewhat the IT team, maybe other business parts as well in your enterprise. This is an enormously complicated thing. We don't have a good answer for it, but I could sketch out the dimensions of this problem for hours.
Yeah, I guess we'll learn more as the next year unfolds. But
yes.
Speaking of uncertainty and regulatory expectations, we're seeing now signals that the FCPA enforcement might be ramping up again. What's your read on the current enforcement landscape?
Honestly, we still don't know. We know what the Justice Department is saying. And what they are saying is that the FCPA enforcement pipeline is filling back up to a traditional cadence. They are also saying anybody who believes that the United States will only enforce against foreign companies, that is wrong. And they have expressly said this, because when they announced their new enforcement policy 6 months ago, one high priority would be enforcing FCPA violations that harm U.S. interests abroad. Now, cynics immediately said that's going to be a foreign company bribing its own government and blocking out U.S. competitors. They're going to go after that company, but they're not going to go after U.S. companies. I was one of those cynics. Now, just this month, a Justice Department official stood up at a conference and said, people who believe that, you are wrong. If a U.S. company is bribing foreign governments, that blocks out U.S. businesses as well, and we will go after them too. Okay, I will take that as that's what they are saying. On the other hand, so far, we still have seen a limited number of enforcement actions, but they can vary wildly from one year to the next. What we have seen still looks like it is enforcing against foreign businesses that are winning contracts overseas. So maybe we'll see more enforcement against US businesses as well. We don't know. But one thing that they are clear on is that while the pipeline might ramp up of cases that will be disposed of, how they're going to dispose of it, that's going to change. And they clearly want to give out many more declinations to businesses if you voluntarily bring the matter to the Justice Department's attention, if you cooperate with them to prosecute the individual offenders involved, and then if you remediate the compliance weaknesses that allowed this to happen in the first place. If you do those three things and your case isn't exceptionally bad, we can talk about that later on if we want. But if you do those three things, they will not prosecute you, full stop. Even if you do have some of those really bad circumstances, it was a tremendous amount of money. The CEO was involved and the board agreed that, hey, let's bribe people. Those are extenuating circumstances, but traditionally that would have led to a very painful settlement. Even now, that will still probably lead to a non-prosecution agreement, deep discounts on the penalty you pay. But you have to want to confess your sins, and you have to want to do the penance of reforming your compliance program. So, do we say that this is going to turn into a declination factory for companies that have that good spirit? Maybe you could say that, but there are going to be cynics out there who think if I just keep quiet, nobody's ever going to find out. I'll fix my problem. I don't have to do anything, and it'll be great. I don't think that is the right thing to do. I think that's unethical. And if you have a whistleblower who doesn't like it and they report to the Justice Department, now you have a big problem. So that's the current state of anti-corruption enforcement just in the United States. And then we still haven't even discussed foreign countries yet. But ultimately, anybody who thinks I can skate and ignore anti-bribery laws, I think you are making a big mistake that could very easily haunt you in 4 or 5 or 8 years down the road, and you would have a painful resolution at that point.
Agreed, Matt, agreed. And yes, to kind of link back to what Kristy was saying earlier of keeping up with these changes, right? Whether it's enforcement, being back on the agenda, or regulations changing, to your point, in the US with trade, in Europe with other regulations as well. Obviously, the impact is global. How can compliance teams focus on building for scale and building these guardrails for scale so that they can future-proof their programs? And it's regardless of how the enforcement ebbs and flows. To your point, right, you still got to disclose, and the basis of that, the foundation of that, is being able to identify when there is misconduct. So at some base level, you've got to have some guardrails in place that allow you to do that, but also thinking about how do you build for the future so you can face these changes throughout next year and the coming years as well. Well, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, some of it is, a lot of it is what we've already discussed previously this hour, is you are going to need very strong data management and data analytics capabilities. Yes, you can also have great policies and procedures for how you contract with a third party, how you govern high-risk third parties and the data you're collecting from them, but you do not necessarily know the form of those policies and procedures in the future. Maybe there will be some local law requirement that you can't take certain data out of that country, and you're going to have to keep it there, and you're going to have to study it from afar. Maybe there will be new types of business that you are expanding into that you never really thought about what those contract terms should be and the documentation you'd need, but you're going to still get the raw data somehow. The compliance team needs to be able to look at all of that raw data and figure out what to do with it. Well, that's data management. Do we have the data? Do we know what this data is? Are we confident in what we're looking at? And then analytics. Can we put these pieces of data together in the right ways to deduce some useful piece of information about our risks? Now, that's nothing new, but it's going to get more easy for companies to stumble into new regulatory requirements. That's true whether it is trade compliance, export controls, tariffs. You haven't encountered those before, but you're going to need that information. You're going to have to come up with processes, and let's be honest, when they're brand new, you're probably going to do a manual process for a while. Nobody likes it, but that's the reality. And then 8, 9, 15 months later, you figure out how to automate it. But you're going to need that data here and now. So you're going to need to figure out how to handle it and how to analyze it. Or you might have existing risks that are nothing new, such as anti-corruption. But as the business grows, you're still going to need to be able to handle all of that data. I mean, sure, AI is going to be able to help you out in some ways, but AI is only going to do whatever it is you tell it to do. So that means you actually need to know what you want to do. And for a lot of companies, that's a difficult thing to figure out.
Makes sense. Matt, I was going to end this webinar with the last question before diving into our Q&A. So just a reminder to our audience to please submit your questions so we can make sure to answer these. But wanted to wrap up with a last question for you around, what is, in a few words, the takeaway for our audience here in terms of building for scale. I'm almost guessing that it's strong data management because we already pointed to that in every case. But is there anything else you want to add or maybe confirm that?
Well, I mean, yes, that's true. And so putting that aside, I think of either tied for first with it or a close second is going to be, we need to remember, this is still very much a people business to run a successful compliance program. What you really need is versatility. Now, versatility for data is good data management, good data analytics, but you need versatile processes or an ability to come up with processes that make sense for your company as they're doing more and more things or more regulations bear down on them. And you have to actually go to the business unit and say, we need to figure out how to answer this new question, this new regulation about AI, or this new requirement to document who our customs brokers are, so we're confident we're paying the right tariffs. How are we going to figure that out? And let's be honest, the business unit is going to see you in the doorway and say, oh man, they're back. What now? And they actually do have to work with you well, and you have to work with them well. It's good if your senior management conveys to everybody else that when you show up at the doorway, they should not be thinking, do I have to deal with them? They should be excited that you are there to help them run their business more efficiently and not step on a landmine. So yes, senior management has to put its shoulder behind getting that attitude out there, but compliance teams still will need to think about, who am I talking to? What are they like? What are their objectives? How do I diffuse any tension with them? How do I anticipate their objections and show them that actually, if we just do things slightly differently, you'll be able to go in a much faster direction, but in a risk-aware direction, instead of stepping on a landmine 2 or 3 or 8 quarters from now, and then we all look stupid in the press, and regulators are here, and the board is asking, why didn't we think of this? That's going to be the key to success.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. And with that, that was all I had, but I'll move on to a couple of questions that have come through from our audience. So Matt, let me start by the first one. As AI pushes data further under the hood, what risks worry you most when compliance teams don't fully understand how data is being managed? I guess, again, about data management.
I think that the weaker you are at data management, the less you'll be able to rely on the AI's work product. Hallucinations of answers is still a big problem with generative AI. And not only is it a persistent problem, but AI is getting better at hallucinating results. And so it's getting harder for us to figure this out. You know, they started by hallucinating certain citations if you ask them, where did this come from? And now AI is starting to offer a source back to this paper that published in the journal of whatever. Not only is the paper hallucinated, but the journal is hallucinated. But are your employees going to know about all of that? If you are just using open, readily available generative AI tools like ChatGPT that's basing its answers on all the information out on the web, all the information out on the web is really unreliable. A lot of it is wrong, a lot of it is biased, and a lot of it is duplicative and repetitive. So you need to really coach your employees on what AI are they using and where is it coming from. However, even in a closed system where your generative AI tool only works on your data that you've validated already, you still need to keep a very close eye on, are you sure that the new data coming into your corporate empire has also been cleaned and understood and validated, so that when the AI gets it and can improve its answers, it's improving its answers and not just giving more effective and persuasive inaccurate answers. I worry about that a lot, that we haven't considered the possibility that the bottleneck for AI might be in the future instead of in the past. And if it's 97% accurate, that sounds really good. But if you have an employee who's 97% accurate, but the other 3%, they just make stuff up, you'd fire that employee eventually. So how do we deal with that? And, a lot of it is going to depend on the data hygiene that we have to be able to let AI do its thing. And I'll stop there, but that's going to be a persistent problem, I fear, for a while.
Yeah, makes sense. Matt, we've got one more question related to trade compliance. So do you see trade compliance becoming more data intensive? I think you've touched on that. And if so, what challenges does that create for compliance teams?
Yes, it is going to be more data intensive because you will need to extract more data from a process that didn't really exist before. We did not really need to worry about tariffs before because we didn't have tariffs before. So we have this risk of accurate disclosures around company of origin or product source of origin, country of origin, what the materials are, what the tariff rates are. How do you know all of that, and how are you documenting all of that information? But for a lot of companies, they have not yet built a robust, sustainable process to extract all of that information. So it's manual, and it's subject to a lot of manipulation. I could give you a real life scenario I already know is happening out there that gets really nightmarish for companies, but you could have a customs broker overseas bribing foreign government officials over there to alter the certifications of some good you're importing into the country. And so then you're paying a lower tariff. A, it's tariff fraud. B, it's an FCPA violation. So it's both. But do we have processes to try and ferret that out? No, we don't. And anybody who says they are either has been subject to immense tariff scrutiny for years, and there are some out there, but most companies know this is entirely brand new for them. So you're going to need to think through, how can we map out what our processes are to deal with tariffs? How can we get assurance every step of the way that we're collecting the right data? Who is the we? Is the procurement team doing it? Is it the tax team that's doing it? Is it the local business unit that's sourcing stuff overseas that is doing it? How do you know you can trust them? Is it a third party doing it for you? How do you know you can trust them? So there's a tremendous amount of process mapping and risk assessing and building the right steps in the process to extract the data even before you get to the analysis and the remediation measures. All of this has to happen, and that's not going to go away.
Makes sense. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the great advice. We'll stop here with the questions. Matt, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us for this hour and taking the time to share all this advice and information with our audience. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please check out our website at ganintegrity.com and take 2 minutes of your time, please, to fill out the survey that will come up right after this webinar. Matt, it was a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Take care.